The following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
Please welcome our first guest of the day, Jaron Kiviat, the runner, operator of @New York Mets News, found particularly Twitter, Instagram, especially big on that Instagram side, and one of the main leaders in the Queens Knights. Is that correct, Jaron? How are you doing?
Yes, spot on. Thank you so much for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
So why don't we go ahead and get started? Just tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you've been doing.
Yeah, so I started New York Mets News actually as we speak today, the 9-year anniversary of it. I started on this day back in 2014, seventh grader at the time, now a college senior. So obviously it's been quite a while on Instagram. Started the page as a passion for the Mets. Didn't really think it would blow up to the point it has. Wasn't really in it for the clout or anything, just loved the game. Didn't really like the coverage I was seeing on social media of the team. And now that included both the fan page side and also the mainstream media side. Didn't love what I was seeing, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. Started the account, and then it gradually blew up. Mets made the World Series in 2015, so that obviously helped my account boost up just a year after I started it. I've been growing this social media page gradually over the last decade or so. But really, this season, what I've wanted to do for a while now is kind of take that digital audience that we've created, that digital community that we've created with New York Mets News, and make it into a real-life avenue where we could all express our passion for the Mets together. And that's why I decided to start this Queens Knights fan group. We just had our first outing this past weekend, the opening series in Miami. Went great, sold out our first outing, and I'm super excited to get things going with that.
Now, you're talking about some of the coverage out there, both of us being in the Boston area. We know what Boston media can be like, but what particular things didn't you like about the coverage you were seeing around the Mets?
Well, when I started the account, it was in the middle of the Wilpon era. The Mets are ran by the Wilpon family before Steve Cohen bought the team. And the Wilpons made a lot of mistakes on many different levels. In my eyes, set the Mets back years with their dysfunction. And ultimately, they are the reason why the Mets are known as the LOL Mets to our generation. And I don't think it was really I don't think enough people were vocal about it in the midst of that era. Obviously, now looking back, when you compare Steve Cohen to the Wilpons in terms of the spending, it's like apples to oranges. But at the time, not as many people were calling out the Wilpons as I would have liked to see, especially for their lack of spending. Similar things that you're hearing now with the Red Sox fans in this market with John Henry. The same things, if not way more vocalized, were Mets fans with the Wilpons and their lack of spending. So I just didn't really like the lack of coverage there. And then on the flip side, there are also people who are like homers for the Mets. So I didn't really want to be too negative, but I didn't really want to be too positive either. And ultimately, I think that's what a real fan is. It's like you want to see the team do well, but when there's reason to call them out, you got to call them out. And, that's just the way I've ran the page. So
certainly. Now, with the Queens Knights bringing this, as you said, digital audience and digital community together in person, how has that? Have you seen much challenge with that so far, or what were some of your big work concerns with that going forward?
Yeah, so what I've learned through speaking with different organizations on their group sales side, each team does it a little bit differently. For example, with the Marlins, we had to buy the tickets off of them and then resell it on their website. And I had a few logistical issues in the process in terms of getting the tickets and then in turn getting it set up on my website so people could actually buy the tickets through my website. That was a little complicated at first, but we figured it out. And then there's other teams, like I know the Red Sox, they were talking with me about an outing that we're looking on this summer where we could form a deal where we could sell it through the Red Sox. So people could buy a link and buy the tickets directly off the Red Sox, which would make things a little bit easier on my behalf in terms of the transaction itself, because it's just more steps of the process when you have to buy it off me and then wait for the Marlins to load up into my MLB ballpark app, and in turn I have to wait like 2 months to transfer the tickets over, as opposed to if it was bought through the Red Sox or the Mets or any other team, it would just be like that. Like you'd buy it and you'd have the tickets. So Yeah, just kind of, learning as I go, how each team does it. And then, there's obviously always going to be naysayers and people hating on social media. So that's another aspect of it, but that's not really as big as the actual logistical stuff.
Overall, from a career standpoint, is your end goal in baseball? And actually, I'll start with that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely my end. It's tough. I feel like my end goal changes as I get older. Like if you would ask me 3, 4 years ago, I'd have been like, end goal is baseball. Gotta work in baseball. Out of college, I want to work either for the Mets or MLB, and that's it. But now I've definitely broadened my goals, and I want to learn as much as I can about the overall sport industry. Baseball is my number one passion for sure. My favorite sport always has been. But, I work for a sports agency right now, and I've been really thinking more about going that route, and maybe even representing athletes from different sports, not just baseball, and maybe even beyond athletes, representing actors and, musicians and social media influencers. I think there's a lot of opportunity in this sport entertainment space, and I don't want to limit myself to just baseball. But me being me, baseball has always been my number one, and it'll be great to work for either a team or a baseball agency out of college. So we'll see what happens.
Certainly. Now, what about the Queens Knights? What's your end goal? Like, at what point do you say, all right, I've really made it with this project?
Yeah, so I'm very entrepreneurial. I like to have different projects going at the same time. I don't want to ever limit myself to one thing or one opportunity. So the Queens Knights is something I see as a potential long-term side hustle. As I build that up, as the Mets fan base grows, as hopefully the Mets start to win more and succeed more in this Steve Cohen era, I think we're going to see a lot more room and reason for excitement within the fan base. And I see the Queens Knights as ultimately being a long-term side business for me. That's what I like to see come out of it.
All right, are we ready to? Unless Brandon has anything to add on this.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say
about?
let's get into some actual baseball talk here. You know, the Mets are such an interesting team to me, and it's really been since the start of the Steve Cohen era is when the Mets have really just, it seems like the amount of headlines and just mainstream coverage that they've been getting has certainly gone up. You go through the huge offseason heading into the 2022 season, where you add Max Scherzer among many other names. Of course, ends up getting, it was certainly a disappointing end of the 2022 season, losing to the Padres.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Cohen reloads and adds Justin Verlander, and at one point we thought Carlos Correa. And even in spite of all those moves, the Mets have come out a little flat to start the season. Kind of take me through what the general sentiment was with the fan base moving into the offseason and kind of where it is now.
Well, I mean, like you were saying, the Mets were certainly grabbing all the headlines. Top payroll, not just in baseball history, but North American sports history. So obviously a substantial amount of spending, an unprecedented amount of spending. But really, you look at Max Scherzer and Verlander alone, that's like $90 million and a good chunk of that payroll. So I think the spending could be a little misleading. My concern with the Mets was the fact that they've, again, assembled a very old roster. They have the oldest roster in baseball. They're banged up again. Not really a surprise. They've had the same training staff, the same training staff people criticize the Mets for in the Wilpon era. Most of those guys are still at the top of the training staff and medical staff of this Steve Cohen team as well. And I think you're seeing it lead to a lot of injuries year after year after year, and it just hasn't been addressed. I know not every injury can be blamed on the training staff. Obviously, there's always going to be a freak accident here and there, especially like the Edwin Diaz thing. Obviously, that's not something that can really be prevented. But overall, when you look at the amount of injuries we've had, it's just very ridiculous. It's overwhelming. I will say, I think the Mets are built to be very, very strong. They should, like last year, be one of the best offenses in baseball. If the pitching stays healthy, the expectation is they could also be a top tier pitching rotation. My concern, they did not, like you said, you mentioned Correa. They needed Correa, in my opinion. They needed to add another bat. They went into this season with practically the same offense and expected different results. I'm not sure what different results they can expect going in there with the same team. Granted, they did win 101 games, but as you guys pointed out, like ultimately they came up short, lost the division, lost the wild card game, lost the wild card series. Didn't really make any substantial changes. Just kind of plugged and played with DeGrom leaving and replacing him with Verlander, or Taiwan, Walker, and Bassett leaving and replacing him with Senga and Quintana. Pretty much this in terms of the talent on the roster. I don't know how you guys feel, but I feel like it's pretty similar as it was to last year. It's not like they've improved that much. So I've been pretty. I was even concerned heading into the season, so I'm not too surprised to see the early season struggles. But I do think we'll be in the playoff mix and hopefully in the NL East mix come September, come October. I think we'll still be one of the best teams in the National League.
Now, you mentioned the whole Carlos Correa negotiation. Our take on it over the winter was, we were genuinely perplexed at the fact that, granted, no team could really do all of their due diligence like Minnesota could, but to have multiple teams be willing to give this money and then back away. Where was your headspace when this whole process went down with Carlos Correa?
It's an absolute carousel. It was a circus act. It was very interesting because Steve Cohen has been one of those guys historically before he bought the Mets where he would stay away from the media. He wouldn't really engage with the media too much. Yet the Mets signed Carlos Correa, who already had a little bit of controversy with the Giants last minute leaving their offer on the table. And then he goes and tells John Heyman, "Yeah, we signed Correa. This is the missing guy we needed. This is the final piece." And that definitely didn't help the whole situation either. I think overall the Mets got some cold feet. And I was frustrated because I never thought he was worth 12 years in the first place. I never thought that would have been a smart long-term move by them. But I think what the Twins did, that 6-year, $200 million contract for a Mets team in a window to win right now, why would you not do it? You clearly need another bat. Correa is very close with Lindor, very close to the few other guys on the roster like Edwin Diaz. He would have fit right into this team. And not to mention the Mets are a team that cannot seem to make a deep October run, and Carlos Correa happens to be arguably the most clutch player in all of baseball if you look at his postseason numbers. So I was perplexed as well. I didn't understand any of it. Even now, I think people are still a little weird about it. I do understand that there is he had surgery on his ankle, I believe, back in like 2014. And then he had a slide in Kansas City late in the season in September, and he looked a little shaken up, but he was fine. He's played 90% of his games over the last 3 years. So I really don't understand all the hysteria over Correa, but I mean, I guess it would be hypocritical of me to be like, Mets need to be careful about the injuries and then go at them for being hesitant about signing a guy who may be injury plagued. I don't know, but I would have taken the risk personally. I would have done it. So yeah, I think we messed up on that one.
And you bring up Edwin Diaz again, of course, has the terrible knee injury at the World Baseball Classic, drove a lot of people who either already were on the there shouldn't be a World Baseball Classic side of things over the edge, and a lot of people who weren't into that take because of seeing a guy actually go down like that. What did you think of the World Baseball Classic?
Overall, it was a great thing for baseball. We were able to see, top tier talent playing in, what felt like a World Series type atmosphere. I'd never seen Lone Depot Park that energetic, and it speaks volumes to see a sold out crowd like 3 weeks ago in Miami going crazy for the World Baseball Classic finals to now it's like a ghost town for the Marlins. So I think that alone shows you the impact the World Baseball Classic has made, even going beyond the MLB in some regards in terms of the international market it bringing to the game, the global eyeballs. There are people I saw commenting on my page from Australia and the UK who had never really had access to baseball like they did in terms of the mainstream media coverage of the World Baseball Classic. So I think overall it's great for baseball. What I will say is it doesn't make any sense for the World Baseball Classic to be played right before the season. I think it would be much better if it was played after the season. So then if there was some sort of freak injury like Edwin Diaz had, maybe there's a chance he returns the following year, as opposed to having the World Baseball Classic right before the year starts. So if a guy gets injured, he's going to miss a good bulk, if not the entire upcoming season. So I think in the future, they should consider moving it to, maybe like December, January after the season ends, or even November.
It's important to note here, too, playing in March, you have the same worries about facilities and snowouts and things like that as you would in March. So there's not really much difference in facilities. But getting back to this winter in particular, the big story, you let Jacob deGrom, one of the best pitchers of the generation, go and swap him out for Justin Verlander, another one of the best pitchers in the generation, and a slew of other additional ads within the same money that Jacob deGrom got from Texas. What do you think of the money he got and the contract from the Texas Rangers, and how do you grade that switch?
I have no issue with what the Mets did. I think you look at deGrom's health over the last couple of years, he's barely pitched, and I think it raises some alarm bells when you think about, we just talked about paying Scherzer and Verlander $90 million. deGrom would also fit in that category in terms of a guy you're paying all this money to, who's pitching once every 5 days and then may not even pitch once every 5 days because he's injured all the time. So I don't know if that would be a good long-term investment. I personally, obviously, I was disappointed that deGrom left, but I think it was probably the right move long-term. Now, of course, in Mets fashion, Verlander gets here, had a fully healthy year last year, and then naturally gets injured on opening day. So it seems like some of these things aren't even really preventable, at least for the Mets. But no, I have no issue with it. I have no issue with the Kodai Senga move or the Justin Verlander move. I actually really liked our rotation going into the year. I did not love the Jose Quintana move. I didn't think that was a good move, but Senga and Verlander, I'm fine with it. I think overall, and even on the Rangers side, I'm fine with the contract they gave him because they're trying to change the culture. They have a bunch of young players coming up, and they're trying to do what the Padres did in terms of having that mix of spending with the young talent coming up at the same time. If you remember when they spent on Manny Machado back in the day, and it was like 2017, 2018, they weren't nearly as good of a team as they are now. So I think that's exactly what the Rangers are trying to do with all these big splashes like, Corey Seager and Jacob deGrom, among others. They're really trying to change the culture there. So I respect it. I always respect the team trying to win.
Now, let's get into the big topic of the day. Of course, another injury maybe brings some good. Omar Narvaez heads to the IL. On up will come Francisco Alvarez. Overall, what are you hearing? What have you seen about Francisco Alvarez? Give us the rundown.
Yeah, Francisco Alvarez, he came up last year, showed some signs, showed a little bit of pop, but overall looked overmatched in the big league. So the Mets thought that coming into this season, he wasn't quite ready to take that turn as the everyday starting catcher. And that's why they brought in Omar Narvaez, which I was okay with. Overall, I mean, the ceiling is sky high for Francisco Alvarez. His bat is electric. And he has the ability, they think, to also turn it around defensively and be one of the game's best catchers. Now, I don't know if he'll do it overnight. He's around our age. He's like 21 years old. So I think people have to be very, very patient with him. But at the same time, a lot of prospects come up at 21, like Julio Rodriguez, and they start killing it. So in New York, for a team trying to win right now, the expectations are still sky high for Alvarez. So, I'm excited to see him. It might take some time before he becomes that perennial all-star people are expecting him to be. But I think overall he's already proved that he can mash in Double A, he can mash in Triple A. There's nothing left for him to prove there. So let's just see him in the big league. Let's give him the reps and let's see what he's got.
Let's talk about two other of your top prospects who many see getting called up at some point this year, those being Ronnie Mauricio and Brett Beatty. How do you see them kind of fitting into this team later in the year? And do you think that they could make an impact? Because these are two guys who are top 50 prospects right now in the MLB, to say the least. And we saw a little bit of Brett Beatty last year in the MLB for the Mets. So do you think that, you do mention how the roster is the oldest in the league, but do you think that some of these young kids could actually, make a substantial impact?
100%. I think that was, the Mets will never say, but I think that was part of the reason why the Mets were maybe a little bit quiet on the offensive side in terms of their offseason moves. Maybe they are very confident at some point all the top prospects could come up and make a major impact. Now that's always going to be a wild card. You never know how a prospect's going to be. And then Beatty's already injured again. He got hit on his wrist, or he had some wrist problems the other day, but he's day-to-day. Overall, I mean, you mentioned Ronnie Mauricio, and even though he's coming off a Winter League MVP of the Dominican League, he is being very slept on. He wasn't even a top 100 prospect. He's not even a top 5 Mets prospect per MLB.com. He's been killing it recently, dating back to last year, and then following up with an amazing Winter League and an amazing spring. He looks like a totally different player than what he was 3 years ago. He's added a lot of muscle. He used to be like a thin, lanky, tall shortstop, but now he's bulky. Now he's kind of built like Yordan Alvarez. He's got his swing almost looks identical to Yordan's as well. So I think of all the guys you mentioned, right now I think I might be the highest on Mauricio. I think he just has that it factor that it's one of those things where you watch it and you see it and you can't really explain much more. But like when you watch the guy, you just know he has that potential because of just the excitement, the electricity he brings. Beatty's always been a great hitter, and I think he will make the transition to the major leagues. Showed some signs last year, and you look at Eduardo Escobar, he's really struggling. He's like 1 for his first 16 to start the year, 1 for his first 16 at bats. So you're going to see as the year goes on, there's going to be more and more pressure to call those guys up, especially if the Mets veterans keep on getting injured and or struggling. So that is something to keep an eye on. I wouldn't be surprised if all the prospects are up by the All-Star break. But I also understand that I think if the Mets wait until June 26th, I believe, to call up either Beatty or Mark Vientos, their other top prospect, they get an extra year of team control. So that definitely will factor into the timing, I think, as well. I think that's also why they were probably left off the opening day roster.
Now, I meant to jump in with this last section with a follow-up here. You were kind of out on the Jose Quintana move. Why?
I think he had a great year last year, but if you look at the last few years before that, not such a great pitcher. And his BABIP last year indicated that I think he was pretty lucky in terms of his overall success compared to seasons in the past. Not to take away from him at all, not to say he's not like a good pitcher. I mean, I just feel like there's guys that they could have got probably for around the same price who would have been better. And I'm just personally not a huge fan of Quintana. I didn't really expect him to make the impact that the Mets are expecting to make. And then, of course, he's already injured. So we can't even see his impact because he's not healthy. So it's just a tough thing. I mean, obviously, he's dealing with a very, very serious issue, but that's not even really baseball related. But, I wasn't really a fan of that move. Thought they could have done better for it.
Now, going into this season obviously for the Mets fan, but more so for the non-Mets fan, who on this team that people aren't expecting really excites you?
I said this before the year started. I mean, it might not be the most exciting guy, but I thought that David Robertson would be able to successfully hold the fort down in the closer spot, even with Edwin Diaz being injured. Everyone was freaking out, including myself. But then I took a step back and I was like, you know what? Thank God the Mets brought in David Robertson, because if not, we would have had Adam Ottavino closing every single game, which would have been another disaster. And of course,
not to cut you off, but I don't think he'd actually be closing every game.
Yeah, no, he wouldn't. It would take 2 weeks for people to be like, okay, this guy's not a closer. But that would have been their plan if they never got Robertson. So, it's huge. And even at his age, I think he's like 37 now. He was average in saves last year, so he's still a decent closer. And now even having more familiarity with the NL East with the Mets after being with the Phillies last year, I think he'll be able to pitch even better. So I'm confident. He already has two saves out of the Mets' 3 wins. So good start to the year for him. And I think he's not the most exciting guy, but I think he'll be a huge reason behind the Mets' success if they end up being successful, even despite Diaz's absence.
And looking at the division race, you clearly have 3 teams that are quite formidable at the top of this. What is your outlook on that? How will the Mets fare this year in the division title?
My outlook is Atlanta is going to be tough to catch, just as they were just as they were tough to beat last year, just as they were tough to beat the year before that. I think they're pretty much the same team. And, in a full year of Spencer Strider coming off the year he's coming off of, the rotation should look even stronger. I hope we could compete with Atlanta all year, but I think they're going to be a very tough team to stop. The Phillies, I think we matched up very well against the Phillies and had a good amount of success against them last year. And I think with the Phillies, though, their thing is they're not going to get hot until later in the year when they start getting some of their guys back, like Bryce Harper, and they start getting more healthy. I know their pitching's gone off to a rough start with Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler not having their best, openings to the season. But I think, overall, they'll still be a very, very strong team. They had a huge loss at Rhys Hoskins, but as we've seen, that's what happens. It's all you got to have the next man up mentality. I still think the Phillies are a pretty deep team, and they'll be a force to be reckoned with. So I think, overall, I think the Mets could definitely be a second place team behind Atlanta and make the wild card. But I'm a little hesitant to say that we'll be able to beat Atlanta for the NL East. If we couldn't do it last year after winning 101 games and holding a lead for like 4 months in that division, why would I say that we're going to do it this year? With the start that we've had with all these injuries and Atlanta's coming out of the gate red hot. I don't know. I think it's going to be very tough, but I hope I'm wrong.
Brandon, do you have anything else?
No, I don't think so. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
No, let's stop.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Hold up, Jaron. Let's just a couple more questions, or really one more question here.
Gotcha.
Would you mind talking a little bit about your podcast you've got? Because that's a pretty cool opportunity we didn't get to earlier either.
Yeah, so I just started a podcast with Josh Wolf, who's a top prospect in the Cleveland Guardians organization. He's one of the prospects the Mets gave up for that blockbuster Lindor-Carrasco trade with Cleveland a couple years ago. We've already interviewed our first 2 guests. Only one episode's out right now with Shane Baz, Rays pitcher. We also interviewed Stone Garrett, who's an outfielder with the Nationals. That should be out very, very soon. And then we have other episodes coming out as well. We want to interview young players at first, and then over time expand to other players around the league, eventually executives, agents, members of the media, social media influencers, you name it. Anyone around the game of baseball who could have a very interesting perspective and unique stories to tell. We want to give them a platform. And overall, it's just about, getting that personal side to baseball players that you don't normally see, on the field or even with the media interviews that we see, in the post games and stuff. So I think just a cool way for the players to express themselves, and want to give them a platform to do that.
Fantastic. All right, before you go, would you mind plugging yourself one more time? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you guys can find me on Instagram. The main page is NYM_news. I also have at the Queens Knights on Instagram as well. And then the podcast Instagram is the Chatters Box Podcast. Instagram is my main. I also post a little bit on Snapchat, which is also NYM_news. And I look forward to more podcast episodes on the Chatters Box Podcast, Mets coverage, and then some more Mets outings with the Queens Knights coming up. So a lot coming up this season.
Fantastic. Well, it was wonderful getting to talk to you. Definitely would love to get this opportunity to touch base again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. Best of luck with everything. Take it easy.
Thank you.